Let me make 3 points. The third one will agree with you. The first 2 points I was trying to make is, one, that September, I think, is too late to stop this train. If we get to September and the train has not been stopped, or the car crash makes my metaphor, it will in fact be unstoppable. Because if the United States does not indicate before that time that it is standing with Israel, then people will interpret that the United States might abstain, or that it might demand concessions from Israel as the price of a veto, and that will have an impact that will affect September. So you have to act now, rather than wait till September. That's number one. Number two is, I think one of the things we have learned is responses on the merits don't actually have a tremendous impact. Because for the reasons that you said, that it's a matter of politics, not law. So you can read to the UN and to the world the 4 requirements under international law for a state. And it will fall on deaf ears because they want the Palestinians to have a state. They waited so long, we don't care about the requirements under international law. So you have to act before September, and it has to be an action that's not responsive or defensive or complaining. It has to be something where Israel takes command of the situation and proposes something, which can either be a new plan with new concessions, which is what everybody thinks Netanyahu is being pressured to do, or it can be something along the lines of what I suggested, which is to take the Palestinians at their word that they are ready for a state. I myself don't think that election, if scheduled, would actually ever proceed. Whoever thought they were going to lose would start the next civil war, which in effect would lead to, hopefully, the implementation of phase 1 of the roadmap, the dismantlement of the terrorists in the Palestinian Authority. If the elections turn out fine and they elect somebody ready and willing to negotiate with Israel, then fine. If it's somewhere in between, at least it will have identified the nature of the putative state that Israel's up against. And that is why I think one needs to think about something other than waiting for September and relying on international law.
Right, hard to beat that. Avi, I have a legal question for you. When you talk about the international law conditions that are required for a state to be recognized, you mentioned a few criteria. In the last few years, we've seen the appearance of new states on the world scene. There was, of course, in the 90s, all the former Soviet republics. Then we had a few remnants of colonies, like Timor became independent through a pretty nasty war with Indonesia. More recently, we had Kosovo. What differentiates all these new, I'm forgetting Southern Sudan, that just is going to become a state in July after a 25-year civil war and a referendum, and the whole population voted to become independent, secede from Northern Sudan. You have blacks, Southern Sudan, seceding from Arab Northern Sudan. So all these countries, new countries, what differentiates them from quote-unquote Palestine?
A state has to have, these ingredients count for every one of the candidates you mentioned. So what is it that makes them states? They would be states if they have a functioning government there that actually is in control of the territory. Now, why is it in the Southern Sudan that there's going to be a functioning state there in control of the territory? Because the North is leaving, and leaving new government in control of that territory. What happened in Timor? Same thing, government left. What happened in Kosovo? Well, the government was convinced to leave. The Serbian government was convinced by NATO bombing and NATO troops to leave. But you have to have a government taking control of that territory in order for there to be a new state. Now, is the Palestinian Authority in control of the West Bank? There are Israeli soldiers deployed throughout the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority is subordinate to Israel in the West Bank. They can become a state if Israel withdraws. So If, in the meantime, the Palestinian Authority can declare anything it wants, it is not a government in control of that territory. Now, interestingly, that's not the case in Gaza. What would happen if they decided, let's say, if Hamas today wanted to declare itself to be a state in Gaza? I'm not sure there's any barrier to that. I don't think they have any particular interest in doing so.
I have a comment about the Goldstone report and a question for Avi about it. The comment is that it's not generally recognized that Israel itself produced 3 lengthy reports before the Goldstone report, during the time the Goldstone report was being prepared, and after it came out, analyzing what happened in the Gaza war. The reports themselves total more than 500 pages themselves, and they were basically ignored by the UN and by Goldstone himself. So my question on that is, in light of that, would it have been any different if Israel had participated as part of the Goldstone process? And since there will be another one at some point in the future, should Israel participate at that point in time?
Okay, so this is one of Goldstone's standard lines. It is that he was forced to adopt these false conclusions because Israel did not cooperate with the mission. Now, it's clearly not true as a matter of law. It's that one is forced, if one party does not go along with a fact-finding procedure, then one is forced to adopt conclusions that one knows to be incorrect. It may be that there are legal proceedings in which there are parties with a burden of proof and parties without a burden of proof, but of course this was not one. And the Goldstone report is fairly clear about the fact that not only did it not have any standards of proof, it didn't have any presumptions except for presumptions of guilt about Israel, right? So no need in our case for presumptions of innocence. But if you look at the Goldstone report, it actually does cite the Israeli submissions, right? It says the Israelis, for example, I actually quoted one of them, right? The Israelis say that Shifa Hospital was used as a military base, but we don't accept that. Why don't we accept it? Because we're not interested in investigating it. So it's, to the extent that Israel did cooperate, the Goldstone report simply blew it off. It was not interested in it. No, none of the evidence would be accepted. So is it true that it would be different if Israel cooperated? I don't think so. Now, there's a political question. What empowers Israel best to fight it? Is it cooperating or staying away? Now, I can think of one case where it helped Israel to refuse to cooperate. That was after the allegation that Israel committed war crimes in Jenin. Initially, the reports were that Israel slaughtered 500 civilians, then it was 150 civilians, and then it was 100 civilians. And as is the way of the UN first voted to find Israel guilty and then dispatched a fact-finding mission to find the details about Israel's guilt. Now, in that case, Israel refused to allow them to land in Israel at all. And eventually, several months later, the UN issued its report, and the report admitted the truth, which was there was no massacre. There was a fight in which half the casualties were civilians and half the casualties were Palestinian terrorists. And there was no war crime. So in that case, it seems to me at least that in that one case, that failing to cooperate, refusing to cooperate, embarrassed the UN into that response. And so I don't know if that's universally true. I don't know that, it's at least in this case, refusing to cooperate with Goldstone didn't help, but I don't think it hurt either.
I think we should let the audience ask questions now. They made the effort of coming here tonight.
I just want to ask that you limit your speech to a question. Thank you.
Gentlemen, I compliment you on your learned experience and your knowledge. I used to be a friend of Richard Goldstone, and he was my lawyer at one stage. Things have changed. A peace accord between Hamas and Fatah. And that is what I think is the unterste Schura of what's going to happen. So I'd like you please to address that.
Well, we obviously don't know what's going to happen in Egypt. And to a certain extent, Egypt is a much different situation from an electoral standpoint than the Palestinian Authority, because the Palestinian Authority has had experience with a prior election that was certified as free and fair back in 2006 by virtually everybody, which was won by Hamas. And the Palestinians have been able since then to see what happened in Gaza from rule by Hamas. They've also been able to see what's happened in the West Bank as international funds have been poured into that area by the international community. And so they have the ability to vote in a system and with a certain amount of knowledge that the Egyptians don't actually have, since the Egyptians are coming off of a 30-year authoritarian rule without real political parties other than the Muslim Brotherhood. So actually, I think that an election in the Palestinian Authority would be a different animal than the one that we would have in Egypt. I agree with you that the one in Egypt is equally as serious, but I think they are two different situations.
Well, I'll start off with the question. My question will be, what is your response to the following? I think Avi Bell put his finger exactly on the issue when he said it's not so much the legal considerations, but the political claims, and legal arguments are only relevant so far as they further the legitimacy as opposed to the legality of the political positions adopted. That basically means that things like the Goldstone report are a symptom of the deeper malaise, a symptom rather than the illness itself. And in some ways, dealing with such detail, we're spotting mosquitoes rather than invading the swamp. And what is the swamp? The swamp, I think, as I understand this as an Israeli, the swamp is the lack of resolve of the Israeli government to win the diplomatic war, and the incompetence of the Israeli leadership in conducting its public diplomacy. Because if you really want to understand phenomena like the Goldstone report and the flotilla debacle, the reason is very simple, very difficult to accept, very easy to prove. Israel is losing the media war and generating phenomena like the Goldstone report because it doesn't want to win. It doesn't want to win, or at least the people conducting the war have a world view which doesn't allow them to adopt a winning strategy. And you're going to see that as September comes along as well, where Netanyahu, instead of defiance, will demonstrate compliance. There are many things he could do. He could say to the administration, gentlemen, you are forcing me to hand over the holy city to the Muslims. Next week, with plausible deniability, I will bring John Hagee and 5 million evangelical Christians into Washington and shut down the capital until you recant. If the Palestinian state is declared, we will cut off all services, water, fuel, electricity, postal services. If you want to be independent, be independent. And if you pump out more water than agreed in Oslo agreements from aquifer, that's a pulse building. So I think there should be a strong, one thing you should learn from J Street, you should send a strong message to Israel, the message opposite to J Street's message. But I think the Israeli government is completely misinterpreting the mood in the Jewish communities abroad, and I think you should send them a strong message.